This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. Well, not exactly. Not at all. Today and next week, it's the Middle East talk. Egypt, Syria, Israel, Palestine, Sunnis and Shiites. Whither the Arab Spring? To help clarify a very complex and fast-moving situation is a frequent guest here, Richard Murphy, former U.S. Ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Mauritania, the Philippines, and Syria. He has served as Assistant U.S. Secretary of State for Near Eastern and Asian Affairs. He has been named Career Ambassador. He has been a Senior Fellow for the Middle East at the Council on Foreign Relations. Also, Ambassador Murphy is a frequent TV commentator and widely consulted expert, and he is just literally back from the region. Welcome back, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you.
Less than 24 hours, 7 o'clock last night. Come on, you're back.
Well, you try landing at Kennedy in the rain.
Oh, please.
Slows everything.
Okay. Why were you there, and what was the conversation? And give us a sense of the feel, at least in Lebanon right now.
That's right. I didn't go beyond Lebanon. The trip was timed for one of the board meetings of the American University of Beirut, and it coincided with their graduation and our trustees meeting. I'm emeritus now, but they're kind enough to invite me back. But there was time to talk to some of the Lebanese political figures and our embassy people, so got a bit of fresh reading on the country and the concerns, of course, major concerns they have about Syria right now.
Okay, let's go to Syria. I mean, you served as ambassador from 1974 to 1980 and served as undersecretary in the region until the late 80s. Talk about the situation in Syria as you understand it right now.
Well, it's a mess right now. It's been a strange year. When the troubles started in Tunisia last year, Mubarak was pushed out in February. The immediate reaction, official reaction in Syria was, it can't happen here because we are different. We have the respect, we have the loyalty of our people. They trust us. We are the ones that were consistent, standing up against Western manipulation, against Zionism and all the problems that the others have compromised on. We never compromised. So they're with us and they'll stay with us.
Think again.
Well, the year has not been a good one. There's some 10,000 dead, and the numbers going up steadily of those killed in the shootouts. And the loyalists are loyal, more loyal than ever perhaps, because there's fear. What if this whole system is overturned? For 40 years, well really it's 50 years with the Ba'ath Party in charge, and 40 years with the Assad family in charge, Hafez al-Assad, who was there for 30 years till 2000. Mm-hmm. Then his son Bashar, who's been running the country since. Known figures, and yes, they come from a minority in the country, the Alawite minority.
And that's an offshoot of Shia.
Shia Islam.
Okay.
With its origins, frankly, a little unclear, just when they split and how close they are today to mainline Shia thinking. But as representatives of the Ba'ath Party, the ideology was, we're running a secular state, and we don't put up with any sectarian conflict. If you're Muslim, if you're Christian, you're Druze, or you're Kurdish, you're going to be treated as a Syrian citizen. But the fact remains they're about 12% of the population, and they control the security services, they control the military, and they're resented by those who say the Sunnis, the 70% plus, think that they should have the power.
Okay, so this boils down to, and we've talked about this literally now for years, a Sunni-Shia conflict in many ways. Let's define some terms here.
Okay.
Who are the Sunnis? Who are the Shias? Where are they in the region? And why do they hate each other so?
Well, the Sunnis both claim equally direct ties to the Prophet Muhammad. But the issue came up over who was right to succeed the Prophet. And the Sunnis have said it's to be by consensus as who is the most worthy successor, to be chosen by senior members of the community. And as history went on, they became the leaders in the Ottoman Empire and several other political groups around what's today known as the Arab world. The Shia said, no, it should be by direct bloodline back to the Prophet. And since he didn't have a son, they trace authority back through his daughter and that side of the family. Anyway, the Shia started as a separate movement, basically within the first century of Islam, when the Sunnis, who were being administered out of Damascus then, the Prophet had lived and died in the Hijaz, in what's now today Saudi Arabia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the authority moved up to Damascus, where it stayed for about a century, and there was a conflict challenge from leaders of the Shia who were killed in a battle in Iraq.
So this fight is on succession, and it's 14 centuries of bloodletting. And now in the Middle East, the main lines of conflict and slaughter are between Shia and Sunni. We saw it in Iraq, and we're seeing it in other places. Yeah. We're seeing it all throughout the region.
Well, you asked about where are they, the
right.
different groups. The one major Shia country is Iran, of course, but they are a majority in Iraq, they are a majority in Bahrain on the island, and they're a substantial percentage in Lebanon today. So all in all, no, they're maybe 10% of the Arab world, but they're in key parts thereof.
Okay. What's going on in Syria? I mean, it looks as if that the leadership, in a sense, that I think you used the term somewhere, in a time warp.
Yeah.
And also that the longer this lead goes on, the more irresolvable it is. And that what you might be headed for is all-out civil war, or a situation like exists in Pakistan, for example.
And one which can spread across the borders of the region into Lebanon, into Jordan.
Okay, let's talk about that. Syria's sort of central strategic location. Why is Syria, an important piece in geopolitics?
Well, geography, I think, is the basic answer. They're sitting right there where the roads of conflict and commerce have crossed over the centuries. Hafiz al-Assad was a man who came to the presidency with what I'd call a weak hand.
Mm-hmm.
There were no great natural resources. The Syrians are known to be just as able and clever as the Lebanese in business, but there wasn't any substantial military. There was no real power base, and he cultivated certain ties in Lebanon with Iran, and built a network of relationships, which in times of trouble he was.
And then the Soviet Union certainly in sort of a global.
Well, during the Cold War, yeah. I remember when I got to Damascus back in '74 as ambassador, it was to reopen the embassy that was closed for 7 years.
After the Six-Day War.
After the Six-Day War, the Soviet ambassador was a rather elderly diplomat, had been there several years, looked a bit tired. And, but he said to me when I called on him, introduced myself, I know your country thinks that the Soviet Union has Syria as a client state, but I just want you to think as you work in this country about this fact. Syria accepts everything from the Soviet Union except advice.
Okay, well, let's take that remark and move it to the current day. I mean, some of the hope of Westerners is that in some way the Soviet Union will put a brake on what's happening in Syria. And the Russians certainly haven't been willing to do it because of their vetoes and threats of vetoes in the Security Council.
Yeah. The Russians and the Chinese got their noses out of joint by the way they were run over by the West in Libya. They say they supported a resolution to ban arms coming into Libya and support for Gaddafi. And then they turned away, and next thing they saw was the British, French, and Americans in there with Air Force, with intelligence operations, and they were on the outside. And as one of them has commented, look, yeah, we used to sell big, and we did sell arms to the Libya. Who's doing it now? The French. So there is that competition, but it's probably not so much the arms sales as Putin's hopes, expectations. He can revive the glory and the power that was the Soviet Union.
But what about this regime? Is this regime doomed? Whether, if not in the short run, in the intermediate run, what are the prospects here? How might this unfold? I know prediction's impossible, but what might be some of the flows out of current events?
Well, following up on the Russian position, they say, look, we don't have any love affair for the Assad family. It's not our business who runs Syria. But same token, it's not your business. It's the Syrians. And any changes should come from within within Syria. So we stand for a peaceful, stable Syria. But force doesn't bring stability. Look at what you've done in Iraq. You got stability in Iraq? I mean, they're very much on the offensive, shall we say.
And they have a point, shall we say.
They have a point. But
this looks like it's devolving into, either widespread annihilation on the part of security and military forces or a prolonged civil war.
Well, that's the worry, that there are Syrians who, speaking as either good Baathis or Syrians, who don't want to see a Sunni Christian upheaval in their country, or Shia Sunni, say that, look, we are not sectarian. Well, that's nonsense. I mean, it's been very much part of the history of the region. But conflict in the area has stirred up sectarian feelings as one group rose and the other declined. What's going on now is spilling over. They've had trouble in Lebanon, up in the northern city of Tripoli, Lebanon. And there's a lot of apprehension that the bad old days of the Lebanese civil war could be brought back again, that those feelings could
again
be stirred
along
up.
Religious sectarian lines generally.
But that was a very, very nasty period in its history. And although it ended in 1990 effectively, unfortunately there are in the Lebanese community people who would be just as happy to have another go at fighting to preserve and advance their community's interests?
The Syrians shoot down the Turkish jet. Then they try to knock down the rescue plane.
Yeah.
The Turks aren't happy. This is a country that's got a 565-mile border.
Yeah.
They've had good relations. It's been visa-free. The Turks can't be happy. They're acting in a very restrained way, but
No, they're not happy.
they're not happy.
If you watched the Turkish Prime Minister, he was talking on Tuesday about I heard him just this morning, giving a talk to the parliament, and this was one very unhappy leader, but saying if there's any further push that looks like a threat to Turkish security, we will respond. But they went to NATO. They didn't go to NATO under the getting together militarily, but to consult under another article of the NATO treaty. And they've got full support and full encouragement. Be clear, but be restrained. And that's where they are right now.
Prospects of international military action doesn't seem very great at this point.
Nobody has an interest in it. That you look around the region, you look around Europe, the United States, there isn't an interest in getting militarily our forces on the ground or providing the air cover for a safe haven, a secure zone within Syria, because we honestly don't understand what would come out of the upheaval.
Right.
So in one sense, Putin has an argument which you have to pay attention to. The changes are going to have to come from the Syrians, and the Syrians don't have a great history of cooperating with each other in opposition movements because they've been put down whenever they've
the opposition seems to be totally disparate and disorganized.
They've allowed token representation in the parliament, one or two members from various parties, but never an effective organization to challenge the Ba'ath, which meant over the last several years, challenging the Ba'ath was challenging the leadership of the Assad family.
Okay, let's move west, I guess, to Egypt. Egypt is the Middle Eastern country that's been dramatically in the news. First you have a round one of a presidential election in May where the Muslim Brotherhood candidate is disqualified. The now winner of the presidential election, Morsi, was sort of a substitute candidate. And on, I guess, 2 days ago, it was declared that the Muslim Brotherhood candidate won with 51.7 or 51.3% of the vote. What's the story there in terms of the role of the military? Because a couple of days before, the military throws out the old constitution, says they're going to write a new one, dissolves the parliament, declares martial law. I mean, they're not giving up power.
It looked like a musical comedy. Declarations were made, constitutions were revised, and then all of a sudden the freely elected parliament is dissolved because the Supreme Court said it hadn't been elected properly. So it looked like a very clumsy power grab by the Egyptian military to keep all of the major powers in its hands, where they have been under Mubarak, under Sadat, under Abdel Nasser.
Right. I mean, since the country was formed in the 1950s by military officers, and all presidents have been either current or past military. The president has no power over budgets, internal security, foreign affairs, the army, but this election is still significant and meaningful.
Yeah. Well, the story isn't complete yet. I mean,
right, okay.
Last week was a comedy of chairs being thrown all over the room, the furniture being broken, and yet out of it came, perhaps because they recognized that if the man generally considered the military's candidate, the ex-defense minister, ex-prime minister for Mubarak, were declared the winner of the election, then the country would blow up again.
Well, I mean, there were protesters waiting at Tahrir Square. I mean, that was going to explode. The United States must be really relieved in some ways that that was avoided.
Yeah, I think you're right. It was a close vote, 51.7 versus 48.3. I guess our presidents would be happy to have such margins. But that said, to be fair on the military side, they may have actually been making sure that the votes were carefully counted. It had been a fair election.
It seems, I mean, at least what I've read in terms of the commentary, it appears to have been a relatively corruption-free, fair election.
They were checking out all the complaints, and the somebody may have recognized that to have the country under a parliament which had won where the Brotherhood, Muslim Brotherhood, had won an amazingly high percentage, plus the fundamentalists, the Salafis, had won another substantial chunk. Then to have a Brotherhood official become president was going to be more than the country could, as a whole, as a general population, could accept. Now, that's one possible interpretation. Nobody has said that from the military side, but now is going to be challenge and response back and forth between the Brotherhood, the new president, who resigned from the Brotherhood to represent all the Egyptian people. He said all the right things in the last couple days.
Right, I mean, and particularly vis-a-vis the Coptic Christians, which had been a major area of concern. I mean, there was a real olive branch, put forward.
One of his vice presidents will be a Muslim, will be a Christian, and he has made especially nice statements concerning the Coptics. You're right.
Okay, so let's generalize this to a discussion of political Islam, because the Muslim Brotherhood is an Islamist party. First of all, what is an Islamist party? What does it mean to be an Islamist?
Well, it depends.
It means a lot of different things, obviously.
For the outsider looking in, it meant something scary. And the powers that were in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Libya, were talking as the Algerian leadership and the military leadership did back in the 90s, in the early 90s, when they had an election and it looked like the second stage of the election would bring the Islamist party to power. They said, this would be a tragedy for the country. So they stopped the elections, and there was a rebellion which has cost, up to date, some 150,000 dead, I think, in Algeria, and the infighting in that country. Our government went along with that. We weren't a principal actor. The French were much closer to the scene than we were. But we subscribed to the idea that this thing called an Islamist movement was somehow sinister and dangerous. My own feeling has been, watching the mess that Algeria became, had they come into power, had they been allowed into office, they would have had to knock off the sloganeering that says, oh, the Quran solves everything. The Quran doesn't solve anything any more than the Bible or the Torah solve everything. It doesn't teach you how to run a power station or a sewage plant. And it could have led to a system where a government which failed, in which case it would have been voted out the next time around. And we got settled with the notion, well, it's one man, one vote. They probably would have won the votes, but then it would have been one election only, because after that they would make sure that they never left office. That's just, well, it's less and less true.
So your argument is bring them into power, and as we've seen, these Islamist parties seem to be more pragmatic when they're ruling rather than when they're in opposition.
Sure.
Is that true of Hamas, for example?
Isn't that true of the United States?
You're asking me questions now?
I don't want to write. All right.
The answer is yes. Okay, go. You get another question. No, go ahead. That's fine. Okay. when we look at the parliament, for example, the lower house of the Egyptian parliament, you mentioned the Salafists before. These people, I mean, really want to go back to the 7th century AD. They want a social, political, governing system that's a theocracy of immediately at the time of the prophet.
Right. Well, that's a fraction of the Muslim population of Egypt. That's not the dominant move, and that's not the Brotherhood itself. They have been apart, and they were fighting in the pre-election period for who could get more votes. They did well, but they don't have answers as to what to do with Egypt in the 21st century. And you're right, to turn the clock back to the 1st century of Islam, when the choices were clear and life was pure and there was good and there was evil, and you could, you could tell who was a good man. He dressed like the prophet. He let his beard grow as the prophet did. And this meant everything. The external signs, a very literal fundamentalist reading of the Quran. But they're not the dominant force in Egyptian politics.
We got 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Crystal ball, what might happen in Egypt? I mean, we talked about what might happen in Syria, but again, is it just too unclear?
Well, it's unclear, but I think it remains a very exciting and promising scene in Egypt. The Egyptian people are a very tolerant people, and they have been looking for some way to develop their country, to get back a role in the region, a role in world politics, and they see that this day may be about to start.
They're telling me goodbye, but we're not going to leave yet. What should the United States be doing vis-a-vis Egypt?
Well, I think they should maintain as broad a set of relations as they possibly can. The arguments for cutting off military aid to the Egyptian forces isn't going to gain us much of anything, if anything at all. We need them, they need us. They support the peace treaty with Israel. There are a whole set of concerns that would be very wise not to just try to throw over the links.
Okay, let's end with our trip through the Middle East at Egypt, and we'll be back. My thanks to Ambassador Richard Murphy for being on the show and agreeing to return next week to continue this conversation on the Middle East here on CUNY TV. Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.